Welcome to Beyond Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Petrellis, and we are so excited for today's guest. I mean, to me, I would say the biggest cover of high school sports in all of Massachusetts. I mean, I can date back to when I was an athlete in high school in Massachusetts in the late 90s, early 2000s, and reading this person's articles, always paying attention to what their opinions of the top teams were in every division, and being a coach, reading the articles and follow along as well. So I'm a huge fan of this person. Was the MIAA class of 2018. They got the Distinguished Service Gentleman Award, and in my opinion, like I said before, the best reporter of high school sports in all of Massachusetts. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Danny Ventura.
Anthony, I'm not going to say anything. This was that was a fantastic lead. If you want to keep going, I'm just going to sit back and listen.
Yeah, I have really high praise for you. I mean, I think what you've done and what you continue to do, especially, even the years that I mentioned with, technology is not quite the same now that it was 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And the work that you've done and the man hours that you probably had to put in of travel and telephone calls and everything else. I can't imagine to stay on top of things the way you have over the years.
Well, I appreciate it. It is a labor of love, but it's something I love to do. My father was a construction worker when he was alive, and he'd always tell me, why don't you get a job for a living while I was doing this? So, I can't lie. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. There are a
Yeah.
lot worse things you could be doing in life than being a high school reporter.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I'm jumping into it, covering coaches and athletes and everything else. And there's just something about it, the hard work, the dedication that gets put into it to be able to cover it, and being able to tell the stories must be really fun and really cool. So we'll dive into all of that today. But the first question I'll ask, and I'm just really curious, like I said, as a fan is, when did you get your start? What was your big break? How did you first kind of get into covering high school sports, early in your career?
Well, I tell you, it wasn't a glamorous start. Of all things, I wanted to always be because when I grew up, I loved Eddie Andelman, Guyman. I would love to have been a radio talk show host, but it just never worked out. And what happened would have been in 1986. A friend of mine was going through a paper in Dedham called the Transcript, and he saw an ad there. He says, "Hey, they're looking for a sports writer, part-time sports writer." And honestly, I was motivated by money. I figured, hey, you can pick up a few extra bucks. So I answered the ad. They gave me a 2-night tryout. I can still remember it was Walpole versus Framingham North, which no longer exists in basketball. And the next night was BC High Xaverian hockey. And after the second night, they told me, we like what you're doing. And I had no clue what I was doing. So they must have felt bad for me, or whatever, but they gave me an opportunity to work part-time there. I gradually became a full-time reporter there, and then got laid off in May of 1990. But the one thing that was good about it, the couple of people who had actually were instrumental in me getting my first break had gone to the Boston Herald. So when they found out what happened to me at the Transcript, they got me my foot in the door at the Herald, and that's how I got started there.
So that's really cool in a way. Like things happen for a reason, as they say, and we're look
Well, I
back.
didn't think about it that night when I got laid off. I wasn't too happy. But as it turned out, that you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and that's really cool, and then obviously you've been there since. So you got your start into the industry. What was like the first sport, or what was so you got a job there? I mean, what were you covering? What were you writing about? I mean, what was kind of like your first break with the Herald?
Oh, there's a ground level, and I was below the ground level. When I got in there, I was working Saturday night and Sunday nights doing the agate page, which is basically the scoreboard, the box scores, the racing agate, and things like that. So it was nothing really, but I was just so excited. Hey, I'm in the door. Let me see what happens. I probably worked there for 2 years and maybe got one or two writing assignments. So it was just a matter, and nowadays there's no way any kid is going to deal with that. But I just figure, you know what, my chance will come eventually, little by little, things happen. They broke. Went from a 2-day a week person to a 4-day a week person. And then in 96, Bob Holmes, who was the high school sports editor at the Herald, went to the Globe. His assistant was Stephanie Tenera. She took his job, and I went for her job and got her job. So it's probably toward the end of, or maybe early 97, I became the full-time high school sports reporter at the Herald. And
That's
it just worked
great.
out from there.
So that was in 96, but let me ask you, part of like building yourself up, I think like a coach and building their program up, they're obviously trying to get a better year after year, their product. You as a reporter, obviously are trying the same thing. In 93, I think it was you that created the Sweet 16 in the Herald. And then obviously your pickoramas over the years on Thursdays have been great, but just kind of focusing on the Sweet 16 for a second, that was since 93. Was that something you created? Were you like a mastermind behind that? And if so, what was your thought process going into that?
No, I mean, it actually was a former assistant sports editor, Joe Thomas. His son had always asked him, he goes, how come you guys don't have any sort of ranking system for high school football? And he didn't, he couldn't give him an answer. So they asked around. So Bob Holmes asked me, he says, would you be interested in doing it? And I said, yeah, I'll give it a shot, see what happens. And then, from there, that's, how that got started. And, the other thing we had talked about off the air was the wrestling column, which in 92. And again, it's a matter of right place at the right time. I happened to be going in on and I remember it was a Thursday afternoon because it was payday. I was working full-time at the Red Sox, part-time at the Herald. So I went in there to get my paycheck. And Bob Sales, who was the sports editor there, was talking to Pat Purcell, who was the publisher of the paper at the time. Pat's son was a high school wrestler. And he asked him, he says, Dad, the Herald has all these notebooks and all these sports. Why not wrestling? So I walk in there, and I can remember Bob Sales points to me, goes, you're going to be the new wrestling writer. Now, naive as I am, I'm thinking, oh, wow, you mean like, and so I asked him, and one of the rare times I wasn't even being a wise guy. I said, you mean like Hulk Hogan and all that stuff? And he got really upset. He was like, because he thought I was being a clown. He goes, don't be funny. You're going to be the high school sports writer for wrestling. So I said, I'll give it a shot. I mean, it's a chance to get a byline. I mean, I knew nothing about wrestling. I knew two guys who coached. I called them up and said, hey, everything you got to let me know right now. And they were great. They steered me in the right direction. And I'll tell you, they really appreciate the coverage.
Yeah. And again, that's kind of like a sport that not a lot of people necessarily covered. And like you said, I think maybe a lot of it just has to do with the knowledge of it. On this podcast, I've had two football coaches who also happen to be two wrestling coaches on here. So being able to pick their brains a little bit about it and the strategy that goes into it, from weight cutting to working out to practice style. I mean, it is really cool. It's really cool, and something that, deserves a lot of coverage, like you said.
Yeah, they really appreciate it. You never have to chase these guys for stories because they appreciate it. They're gung ho. And like you said, there were a lot of things. I mean, I've done this for 30 years, and there were still things in wrestling that I'm like, why would what went behind this? And I mean, I'm not shy about asking a question, even if it makes me sound like an idiot. So be it. But I'd rather know why this happened, even if it's an obscure question. I'm going to ask, and they're great. I mean, they'll explain everything.
Yeah. So jumping back into your Sweet 16, I mean, obviously you guys begin to run that, it's a column or an article that you have in the paper every week. How do you go about determining that? Obviously in the early days of not as much technology like on Twitter, now you can find the score of any game at any time because someone's writing about it or covering it, or it's an athlete themselves or a coach or whatever. But how did you go about, making those decisions based off of, it's all over the state, it's different conferences, different leagues. So how do you go about doing that?
No, it's pretty. I mean, we're just Eastern Mass, but it's still, you're talking 200 schools. And one of the big
Right.
things you have is the big thing, is a Division III school better than a Division I school? Because there's that stigma. If you're a Division I school, you should be the best. And sometimes these Division II, Division III schools, they're pretty good.
Yeah.
And so that's where one of the biggest things you get is, how can you compare somebody from the Catholic Conference to, say, the Bay State Conference? And just, it's a lot of it's just subjective.
Yeah, and I think that's, it brings in a excitement, like an aura. I feel like when you when you put those out there, I remember there'd be times either being a coach or as a player being like, oh, he doesn't think that about us, so you must get that a lot, I'm sure. And
No.
especially with Twitter now. I mean, there's some days I look on there and you're just reporting something or saying something, and people just come after you with daggers. I mean, how do you take that? I mean, how do you respond to things like
you
that?
you gotta, you do have to take a step back and realize it is Twitter. There are a lot of Twitter tough guys out there. And what you try to do, I mean, with kids, I don't, go at, because they are kids. You're going to look like a fool in the long run if you engage in a kid who's giving you a hard time. I just let it be. I try to explain my situation, and as long as they're being, as long as they're fair. You can disagree with me, that's fine, because a lot of times they're probably right and I'm wrong. But I mean, as long as you do it in a professional manner. If you start, you effing this, that, that's like, no, no,
Yeah. And I
I
see that. I see that sometimes when people respond to you, they ask you a question, you give your opinion, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of people commenting disagreeing with you. And I'm like, you just asked him what he thought, and now all
Right.
of a sudden,
It's the old thing. Don't ask the question if you don't want to hear the answer. I mean, it's
exactly.
my one man's opinion. It doesn't mean I'm right, but hey, it is what it is, as they say.
It's too funny. So, going back, I guess a little bit before that time, again, no social media, all of that. You obviously begin making a name for yourself in '96. You kind of, you take over. Talk about early research. I mean, how'd you go about figuring these teams out? Because again, the access to these teams and these programs are not quite the same of what it is today. So how would you go about, say, assessing in the football off season, maybe in the summer, what teams are, the kind of tops of each division, so on and so forth? I mean, do you have a team that kind of works together? How do you go about
Well,
finding
I usually, like I said, and it drives my wife crazy because we have papers all over the house.
out?
But I'm an old school guy. I have notebooks. I have all my pens. And what I do is I write at the end of the season. I will write, I have all the stuff, and I'll just keep notes of, like, who's got a lot of kids coming back and things like that. What's made it tougher nowadays, in the old days, a kid went to high school. He was there for the duration. Now the concern is he there next year? Because you got the prep schools, you
Right.
got transfers and all that. So you do have to do a little more legwork. You don't want to put a kid in, oh yeah, so and so is going to be the star player at, say, Foxborough. Oh, by the way, he's at their academy. So,
Right.
there is a lot of legwork involved, but a lot of the stuff is done months in advance.
Yeah. So do you base it, like, I guess when you call, like, I'm sure you guys call coaches and ask teams what they think about who they are, their identity a little bit. What are the types of questions that you might ask yourself to a coach to maybe really learn more about their team?
Yeah, what I'll do is, like, when I'll call, how many guys you got coming back, what do you feel you're going to have to do to be successful, things like that. And then and you've developed a relationship. A lot of these guys have been there for a long time, and which guys you can go are your go-to guys. They'll give you the honest assessment about the league, their team in general, and you can go from there. It just branches out.
Yeah, and I think you do a really good job of that. I always say that you're so thorough. I feel like when you put your information out there, there's statistics, there's names, you keep an account, who they play, the conference that it is. So that's the one thing I've always kind of found really cool about you, especially for football, just because that's my world, is that you're pretty accurate, and your picks are pretty accurate too. I mean, sometimes I think you should gloat about your picks on Twitter a little bit more, what your record is week to week, but you're usually right a lot more than you are wrong.
I do okay. I mean, they don't remember when you're right, but they always remember when you're wrong, and that's fine. And that's fine.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. You obviously have a great sense of humor with it, and but no, you do great. Your picks are great. I mean, people don't talk about your record enough. Your record is pretty good.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
So, one part of it, obviously, we'll go back to '96 and we'll kind of just keep building our way up. And maybe it was a few years after that. But at some point in your career, did you maybe start thinking, like, wow, we're getting a lot of attention in our coverage of high school sports, whether it's through our articles or, I remember I see you at a game and I'd be like, oh, Danny Ventura's here, like it was kind of like you were the guy. I mean, what point did you maybe start seeing a little bit that you were becoming the guy in this area for high school sports?
I think you're probably 4 or 5 years in, from the '96. By the beginning of the 2000s, people kind of, and I think they've always respected. And I don't think it's as much me as the Herald itself, because I think we've always prided ourselves. We've been very lucky that we've had upper management has always been very, very supportive of high school sports. And I think it goes back to with Pat Purcell, in that his son played, he was into high school sports and he was all in. And I think it's a trickle down, if he's all in, then your boss is going to be all in, and it works down. So I think we've been blessed that our paper has been very good, very supportive of high school sports. And that's in turn allowed us to, get our names out there more. And it's a lot, our popularity has increased as a result of that.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, I was a player from 97 to 01, so, or 2000. So, even then I was reading, I mean, we always go to the coffee shop around the corner from the school, pick up the Herald, be opening to the back and looking for your articles. So yeah, so you guys definitely, to me, when I was in high school, I felt like you were the coverage for sure. So jumping a little bit more into obviously your coverage, now we're jumping into more when technology kind of jumps into this piece a little bit, but Twitter. I mean, how much has Twitter changed the game as far as your coverage goes, to your article writing, for you to be able to access information instantly and probably make your job a lot easier in a lot of ways?
Yeah, in some way, like, the perfect way to explain this would be Friday night football. Prior to Twitter and social media, we would, on a Friday night, we would probably be in the office at like 1 a.m. chasing scores. Now, we pretty much, because of Twitter and, the athletic directors being so on top of it, we probably have all the scores by close to 11 o'clock now. So it probably cuts, and as a result, we're getting scores into more editions of the paper. So in that regard, Twitter's been has been a real great, has been a boom for us. Where it's become different, social media today as opposed to, say, 25 years ago. Today, if you get a story, you got to get it out there now. In the old days, if you had a story, you could sit on it until then and, get it into the paper the next day and not worry about being scooped. Now, if you get something, you got to get it out there.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that aspect of it for sure, because chances are people are just so easy for themselves to get it out as well that, yeah, you got to get it
Sure.
out right away or you're late to the dance. So yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't think of it like that. So one thing I'll just ask you that, I kind of ask a lot of coaches, especially early on when we started this podcast, like last year at this time or even more before then, is COVID. I mean, how did COVID affect your job? I mean, obviously there wasn't sports, and there's probably creative ways or creative things that you maybe were doing during that time to still, in a way, shine a light on high school sports, even if it wasn't in session. So how did something like COVID really affect your coverage and your job, and maybe things you had to do differently as a result of it?
Or you had to become a lot more creative, because there may not have been high school sports, but, the paper does have to get out and you've got to find stories. And I'm blessed. I have a great staff of people who love to work. They're all in it for the right reasons. Guys like Greg Dudek, who has moved on, Matt Feld, Tom Mulhern, the whole group of guys. They're all in it for the right reasons. They're passionate about what they do, and they were godsends. I mean, they came up. We all chipped in. We all had ideas, and we were able to get through it. But it wasn't easy in one regard, but in another regard, it helped in that we were able to go back to actually writing, stories that, really, you could dig into the meat of it rather than just a quick 300-word thing, get it out, and that's it.
Now, you mentioned a couple people that you work with too, or that you previously worked with. Are there some people out there now that cover high school sports really well? Like some names that you might want to just throw out there that, either previously you've worked with or that that just cover it in a really good way?
I mean, you look around the landscape. I look at the Salem News with Phil Stacy, who, I mean, to me, the coaches in that area should count their blessings. They have people like Phil, Matt Williams, and their staff, because they're passionate about what they do. They give phenomenal coverage to those schools in that area. You get someone like a Chris McDaniel, who's down at the Patriot Ledger, Brockton Enterprise, does a great job. Tom Castle over at Metro West. I mean, pretty much everybody, everyone's in it for the right reasons. It's just the local communities need to appreciate these guys, because, they're not getting rich. None of us are getting rich doing this. And in a lot of cases, it's a labor of love. And for those local papers, I just hope the people in those areas have a great appreciation for what these guys do for them.
Yeah, it is. It is amazing. I know like Jamie Pote here. I'm in Wilmington. He
Sure.
covers Wilmington and Tewksbury sports. He's so good at it. And like you said, when you have people that are really passionate about it and really want to cover it from a standpoint that not a lot of others do, it is really nice and kind of a lost art in a way of some people that don't cover as much as they maybe should. um but jumping into like your research, right? Because I think that part of what makes writers so unique, or people that cover high school sports so unique, is kind of the research that goes into it. You obviously do a lot of things to keep it fresh and to keep it current and updated, and obviously between your pickoramas and your sweet 16s and your shout outs or players of the week, I mean, people really pay attention to who you are as a reporter of high school sports. But like, talk about the research that goes into, because you're covering sports, pretty much year round minus the summer, and even then you're building your stories coming up for the fall season. Talk about the research you do. I mean, when do you start putting things out? Say like, okay, football and soccer and everything starting in the fall. When are you kind of starting the research for that?
Well, football, when the start of the season is September, you're probably starting in mid July. Like if I go, like my wife and my wife and I have a place in Florida, and we go down there for like a week or so. I mean, I will do some stuff early in the morning, late at night, just to start. Even at something as simple as getting high school the schedules, because it takes a lot of time. Just things like so it take you're not going. The season begins on September 11th. I mean, you're not starting your research on the 10th, so it takes time. But like I said, I do like to keep the notes and all that stuff. So it makes it my job a lot easier in terms of having to go into this and get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's, about a 6 to 7 week, let's call it 7 weeks, let's say,
Right.
that you're starting. So now you're in fall season. When are you starting to now say, okay, we got to get ready for winter season that's coming up?
Probably tomorrow.
Yeah.
I pretty much do the basketball and I do the wrestling, and I'll probably go into the notebooks tomorrow, because we do have a couple of days before Thanksgiving. So, I probably, in the morning, I'll just, grab a cup of coffee, sit at the table and just, start sifting through it real quick. These are teams we need to look at, because practice, they officially can start the Monday after Thanksgiving. So they're chomping at the bit themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially I've had a lot of basketball coaches on this podcast, and just texting with them to see if they're getting ready in a couple more weeks. And you pay attention to their social media and there's countdown. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
you can see that winter
Yeah.
sports, they're ready to go. They're definitely, those coaches are ready to go. So it's fun. Um, and then obviously, okay, so you're looking at that as from now till start. So maybe like 4 or 5 weeks. Is that the same thing going from winter to spring, as far as
Yeah.
when your research starts then as
Yeah,
well?
pretty much. Usually the state finals are usually in basketball and hockey right around St. Patrick's Day, and as soon as that ends, then boom, we're right into it for the spring. You do catch a little bit of a break in the spring, because a lot of times, because of the weather, baseball and softball, their season may start on, say, April 5th or whatever. But more often than not, they're getting games canceled because they can't get out there, because the weather conditions, their fields are not available, they not suitable to be played on. I mean, we're getting more and more turf fields, but there's still a lot of those grass fields that, it presents a problem.
Yeah, it does. Especially the rain that we've had, a couple days
Right.
like that, your fields, depending on
Yeah.
its how much water it
Yeah.
can
This
like
isn't
take.
Fenway Park or Polar Park. These are regular, fields, they get soaked. They're soaked.
Yeah, and it's like, what can you do? So at that point of doing your research, I mean, over the years, are there certain coaches that you have a pretty good relationship with that you can not only just maybe reach out about their specific team, but maybe also teams that are in their league, or teams that they'll be seeing a little bit, just to kind of get a heads up? And if so, do you want to give any of those coaches a shout out that you have a pretty good relationship with?
I mean, in basketball, Paul Connolly, Bill Loughnane, Dave Fazio. I just don't want to overlook anyone. Guys, these are guys who've been at it for 25, 30 years, and they know the lay of the land. So they know if they're not going to be that great, they'll be pretty honest about it. And they'll tell you, these are the teams in our league that, because these guys know that they know who's going to be good, who's not going to be good. So, you develop a rapport. And there were certain guys that, you talk to them and they're probably not telling you the whole story. And you can figure those out too. I'm not giving those names out though.
No, I would never ask. I would never ask.
But you do have your go-to guys, and that's it for every sport, and that's everyone has those guys that they feel like if I call this guy, I know he's gonna steer me in the right direction.
Yeah. Are you ever like shocked when someone's like, yeah, we're not going to be that good. And then all of a sudden, week 7, you're looking in the paper and they're like a 1 or 2 loss team. You're like, oh,
Oh
yeah, they're
yeah,
not going to be that.
believe me, they get the business.
Yeah.
They get I give them I call them the sandbagger of the year award candidates.
Yeah.
And most of them are probably shocked. Some of them, they may not be telling you the whole story about what they have, but they will get the needle for it though.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many coaches now in the football where like, yeah, we're not going to be that good, and then you pay attention to week 6,
It's like,
7, you're like, not that good. Look who you beat,
yeah.
um, and when doing all this research, are you a one-man show or do you have like a staff underneath? I mean, how does that kind of work as far as
Well,
the
for
team aspect?
specific sport like basketball, I pretty much do a lot of the preseason legwork myself. Hockey, we have Tom Fargo is pretty good at it. Basketball, I do have Matt Feld who helps me out a lot. He's very good. The other sports, we have Tom Mulhern. We have guys like Brian Roach. Joe Reardon is our track guy. I mean, he's, I just get out of his way, cross country, indoor track, outdoor track. I just tell him, hey, I need this by then. And, he's on it. He's the premier track guy in the state. So,
Yeah.
again, it goes back to being very blessed that I got a staff of people who are fantastic at what they do. They make me look good.
I mean, that's really good when you have a great team that's like passionate and people that really know what they're doing. It's nice to have someone else that kind of has that same passion, following along, doing all the homework, checking all the boxes. I mean, yeah, that's nice. And for coaches and athletes, it's so appreciated because they're putting the work into it. And sometimes they don't realize behind the scenes how much work is getting put into the actual coverage of things. I mean, I said earlier, to many guests that I've talked to, you wish there was a million more people that would go out there and cover high school sports. And sometimes every sports program can't get coverage and, it happens, but there's a lot of special things that are going on in programs. And I think that you guys do a tremendous job of really trying to catch that and really educate those out there who are paying attention to it.
You make a great point. Yesterday, for instance, Saturday, we had state finals. I mean, we just didn't have enough bodies. And it's like, you feel awful. Like these schools are playing for state championship, but because they've broken into so many divisions, it's like, we just don't have the manpower to feel about it. But you do the best you can and hope some people understand. And if they don't, I can't blame them really. I mean, it's just we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, and that's it, and I even said to people when we do our coverage of we go to games and cover the experience and so on. It's, there's a lot of special things going on, but there's only just so much coverage. I was on a podcast and said that to somebody. I'm like, it's hard what you pick which teams you're covering or what areas you're covering because you just don't know sometimes what's going on in other programs, and paying attention to that win-loss record is just, you kind of have to do that a little bit more with the job because those games are a little bit more valuable in a sense,
Yeah, you're right. And what you try to avoid is, obviously in every sport, there's going to be 2 or 3 marquee teams, and you probably could cover them every game, but you try to balance it out. So, you will give them their coverage, but you try to get other, schools covered, because hey, they're part of it as well. Just because the team is the number 1 team in the state, you go to another city, they're the number 1 team in their eyes because they don't care about that team. That's their kids playing. So in their
Right.
eyes, my kid is number 1. And that's, I don't blame them for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, like you said, I think it's just a matter of you're trying to get the best coverage you can out there. And I think you do a phenomenal job in doing that. So, tip of the cap to you for sure. when it comes to, just like fun questions that I want to ask you, experience of, have you been to Fenway for any of the Fenway football high school games? And if so, just what's the experience like? That's like, I would love to cover a game there, on the
It,
field, being there.
it was unique. I mean, I went the first year when it was St. John's Presbyterian, and it was definitely different. You look down there and it's like, geez, Red Sox aren't out there.
Right.
And it's a different dynamic because, the way they set the field up, both teams are on the same side. And it's just, the uniqueness of it is what makes it special.
Now,
I mean,
where's
there
the
are
field
guys who've
go
gone there.
across? Where's
Huh?
the field? Now, does the field go across like diagonally across the outfield? Is that how it goes?
No, it goes across the infield.
Oh, so they go right across the dirt and everything?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Wow. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it must be a really cool experience. And obviously, you mentioned those two teams that start off and doing it. It's those are two really good teams to have one of the
Right.
first
I
games
think,
there.
that, and they got great crowds there. The first, they've branched out, and what they've tried to do is they try to get different teams in there, which they did this year with the 8 teams going there. I'm pretty sure none of them have been there before. I'm almost positive. In fact, I think Southie and Eastie, I think, might have played there in the 40s one time at Fenway, but the 8 schools that are going there have never played there before. So for them, it's unique.
That is cool, and I think there should be somewhat of a rotation.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think you got to look at like school size and all that to make sure that the crowd's worth getting there. But absolutely, everyone should get a shot at playing there. I
And
think
what
that's
is
a lot of
funny,
fun.
though, is that you do get some schools who don't care about it. They'd much rather play their Thanksgiving Day game at home. And for me, I'm of the school like, geez, you got a chance to go to Fenway. I mean, you
Right,
gotta go.
right.
But there were guys who, a few years ago, what happened with Winthrop High School, they had the opportunity to play there and they declined. And their rationale was that their home field had been renovated. They were in the process of, I think, a 2 or 3 year renovation. For those seniors, they never got to play a home game. And, playing a home game on Thanksgiving would have been their last game. And they felt so strongly that, we want to play here in Winthrop, that they declined.
Wow, that's interesting. That's it. That's
Yeah.
wow. That's a big program decision. That's
Yeah.
like
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. So speaking of all that and decisions and so on, I mean, playoff system. I mean, this year the playoff system in high school football has been a lot different. I know they're using a whole new rating system. I mean, what are your thoughts? I know you and I chatted a little bit about it off the air, but share your thoughts, your opinions about it, and how you think it's gone thus far to this point.
I like it. I mean, I was I'm a big proponent of it. I think I never was a crazy sectional guy. I thought, it was totally unfair the way it was done. I don't understand, if you're in a state where everything's supposed to be equal, how is it that one section would have 22 teams vying for sectional title and another section has 6 or 7? I mean, there's no fairness there. I mean, this thing, you're basically throwing everyone into the pot, and here it is. This is what we're doing. And if you look at it, the way it's worked itself out, it's hard to find fault with it. You look at in all the sports across the board, there may be one, a team like a Canton, or, in boys soccer, or Paulo Freire in volleyball, that were seeded, in the 20s, and Canton got to the state final. Paulo Freire won the Division 5 volleyball, but for every one of those, you're getting section, the final 4 where the seeds are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5. So it is working. And
Yeah.
I do like it. The one drawback you do hear is transportation. There are some games, like for instance Monument Mountain, which is almost way out west, had to play at Nantucket.
Ugh, yeah.
That's basically an all-day trek for them. And it's, if you do it once, that's fine. But if you get stuck where you're a low seed, you win a couple of games, and you have to do that 2 or 3 times, I mean, that's going to cut into your financial budget. And in this day and age, where every penny counts, can you afford to keep doing it? A
Yeah.
suggestion that I've mentioned is, maybe in the first round or so, if you've got, maybe a team that, say a team that's seeded 33 and one's 34, if you can flip-flop them where you cut the travel, it might be, more beneficial there in the long run. But by
Yeah.
and large, I'm a big proponent of it. I like how it worked in the fall. I think you're getting the best teams. I look at boys soccer. The Division I state championship was Brookline and Newton North. Those are your Thanksgiving Day arch rivals. That would never have happened in the old system. Now here you are, your bitter rival, and you're playing for a state championship. I mean,
Yeah.
how good is that?
I mean, that is cool. And you're right. Like, you never really would maybe see a team in a championship because you might be on the same bracket, on the same side of a, and you're playing each other like in a second or third round, which still has meaning to it, but not as much meaning, like you said, like a state championship and things
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that.
you've seen it so many times in the sections. I think we talked about this a few years back. Duxbury was a very good basketball team. They were the top seed in Division II South. They drew Catholic Memorial, who was 10-10, but that was kind of like a fake 10-10 because they played such a brutal schedule that, and I jokingly put it in the paper saying that, this could be the de facto state final, and it's a first round matchup in the sectional. As it turned out, it was a phenomenal game. It was an overtime affair. Duxbury wound up winning it and then just rolled through everyone to win the state title. And they said they agreed from when the tournament stuff came out. They said they felt all along that that was going to be their toughest game. And that really shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, sometimes teams play up because they know that they can play up and kind of build their toughness. Or the coach thinks they're pretty good and they want to see how
Right.
good they really are. And they're playing teams that are outside their conference or outside the division that are higher seed, higher rank, higher, just better teams, bigger schools. And that gets them ready for their conference play and eventually their tournament play. And like you said, you could have a team that's like smoke and mirrors 11-9. That's really like a 16, 17 win team and had
Oh,
they maybe cupcake their schedule a little bit.
exactly.
So yeah, no, I totally get that. And like you said, those matchups happen. So, was there anybody in any of the tournaments that you felt like kind of made like a surprise run, any high seeds that snuck through making championship games or things like that at
I
all?
mean, look at football. The one that jumps out is Randolph in Division 8. I mean, they're a double-digit seed, and it's a program that has struggled in recent years. They 4-4 during the season, but they got on a nice run, and now here they are. They're playing in Gillette.
Yeah, it's unreal. And the old playoff system, like the past playoff system was great too. But before that, I had guests on here that we talked about the old system before that was that you had to win your league. And if you didn't win your league, there's no chances. So a 4-4 team like that maybe was playing better
Yeah.
week 4, week 5, week 6, week 7, week 8, versus the first 3 or 4 weeks of their season. Now they get an opportunity to, kind of get a hot team going in there that got a lower seeds playing the best football they've played all year. And, here they are going to Gillette Stadium now.
Yeah,
So
you make a great point because, in the old system, winning the league in those days before everyone split into two different leagues, when you had that one league, you lose a game in week 1 and you lose to a team that you think is probably going to win the league, your season's over. I
right,
mean, because you're going to have to hope somebody beats that team twice. And generally in football, that's not going to happen. If the team is going into the season as the favorite to win the league, you might get them once, but they're not going to lose twice.
right,
And, if you're the team that loses it, I mean, one year a team lost in week 1, they went 10-1. See you later. I mean,
right.
you should be rewarded for 10-1. I mean, to tell a team that goes 10-1 that you're not good enough to play in the postseason, I always did not sit well with me.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I remember the year that I was a coordinator at Arlington Catholic and we won the Super Bowl in '08. But, Mashpee, like Abington were like two teams that were undefeated that played each other and only one of them goes to the playoffs, on the
Right.
other side of the bracket. So like you mentioned, you got a 10-1 team that was perfect up until maybe their last game to
Well,
decide
in
it.
this case, it was the first game of the year.
Oh,
So they
wow.
went
Even
10 weeks and they know that. I mean, give them credit that, the kids didn't sulk. They showed up every week, but they knew the score. Basically they played for second place.
Yeah, and that's tough. It's not easy, especially if that's early on in your season, to
Exactly.
know that,
Yeah.
so totally get it. So again, just kind of questions I like to ask you just all about this. I mean, Thanksgiving football in Massachusetts. I mean, over the last few years, we've been seeing more Wednesday night games that draw huge crowds and, schools that are starting tradition. But just talk about Thanksgiving football in Massachusetts. I mean, you write some tremendous articles and really cover a lot of teams and tell a lot of good stories. So just your experience of Massachusetts high school football when it comes to Thanksgiving morning.
Well, clearly with the playoff system, it's, the meaning of Thanksgiving has gone down a little bit. I've always felt like it's Thanksgiving. No matter what, the day should be special in itself. Some of the purists feel like, there's no meaning to the game because there's no league championships on the line, although there's still technically there is, but there's no playoff implications on the line anymore. And I think there is, a guy like Steve Dembowski at Milton has rattled his brain trying to come up, and he's come up with what he feels are good ideas to try to, bring back Thanksgiving significance, but still have that playoff where you have, where it has meaning. And it just hasn't, it's a tough state because, Thanksgiving does mean a lot. And if you want, and there are some coaches, they'll never admit to it on the record, but have no issue with getting rid of Thanksgiving because they want to play in the playoff.
Right. Yeah.
So it's tough.
And I was going to ask you that. So it's interesting that you kind of jumped right into that. I mean, with playoffs, it certainly has lost its luster. I mean, you could in essentially play like in the old playoff system, maybe not so much the new one, but you could have played your Thanksgiving opponent 3 or 4 weeks before you actually played your Thanksgiving opponent if you were matched up like in the same seed or same league or whatever.
Sure. I mean, and then you get the one thing that really drives people crazy is you get these teams who are going on Thanksgiving. They know they're in the Super Bowl. Do you play your kids? Do you not play your kids? And I think it's at the bigger schools, they tend to play their kids. But a few years ago, Millis High School, they were in the Division VIII Super Bowl. They chose not to play their kids. And their coach was like, look, I have 22 kids here. I mean, I get one kid hurt. That's like losing 3 kids because he's my offensive starter, he's my defensive starter, and he's on special teams. So one injury is 3 guys I lose. If I had an 80-man roster, yeah, I'd play. And you can't argue with this logic there.
Yeah. And I've heard it too. I mean, I won't name schools, but I've heard that same thing happen on Thanksgiving. They sit a bunch of their starters because they don't want them getting hurt for the next week.
Right.
And I can't necessarily blame them, like you said, depending on even school size. I mean, there's some coaches I've had on here this year that don't tackle during the week of practice at all. Everything's wrap up and so on because they can't afford a risk injury of losing guys on their roster because they are 25, 30, total on their team. So definitely, I could see it both ways. What would be your advice to young writers or people that want to cover sports from a media perspective or from a newspaper perspective? What would be your advice to those looking to get started into that as they look to climb and gain significance in that field?
The one piece of advice I got, and it's probably as simple as it's going to get, but it makes all the sense in the world, is you don't want the word no in your vocabulary. If you're going to get into this business and they want you to cover something, the more available you are, the more often your phone is going to ring. If you're a guy that say, we need you to cover gymnastics, then, I don't want to cover gymnastics. There's someone else who's going to cover it. And that person is going to wind up hearing his phone ringing a lot more. So the more available you are, the more popular you're going to be with your sports editors. So to me, if you're serious about getting in this business, you've got to be willing to work. And it does, you're not going to get the cream of the crop assignment every time, but you've got to turn your assignment into making it like a cream of the crop assignment.
Yeah, take your chance, right? I mean, you give it an opportunity, have fun with it,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just you cover it in a different way that people are like, oh wow, this is different and unique about how they go about doing it.
I covered gymnastics. I mean, I don't know anything about gymnastics, but when they call me, can you cover it? Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, there's no
You
reason not to.
do the best you can.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask questions. Like field hockey, it's a sport with a million whistles. And I'll always sit near the thing because they always have a referee who sits at the table. And I'm not shy about, what was that whistle about? Because there are some whistles, some of them are pretty basic, but there are other ones that are obscure whistles. And one thing is, don't be afraid to ask questions. You may ask a question that's probably not the smartest question, but you know what? I'd rather, for my own peace of mind, have that answered, even if it's, say, for a dumb question. I don't care. Give me the dumb answer, and then I can move on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one thing you have to realize is that no question is kind of silly. When I have guests on here, sometimes I'm like go back and forth of whether I should ask something, and it's like, you know what, just ask it because you never know the conversation that it leads to. Then all of a sudden it gets you on to something else, and then boom, you're having a killer conversation because you decided to ask a question as opposed to maybe not doing it. Totally. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our last segment, which is called our 2-minute drill, our Cheney's 2-minute drill. So this is how it works. I'm just going to fire some rapid fire questions at you, 1 or 2 word answers. We're pretty lenient here. I'll let you explain anything you want to explain and vice versa. If I want to throw the red flag and ask you to explain something a little bit more, you most certainly can. But my
Sure.
coaches love this segment. They have a lot of fun with it, and we'll get the timer set, and here we go. So most pumped up like stadium, gym, or school you've ever kind of go to the cover a game or watch a game in your career?
It's funny because basketball, which is my favorite sport, Andover High School used to have a band in the gym, and it was loud, but they were great. I mean, I used to go there. I'd sit near the band. I mean, they were loud as heck, but I loved it.
The band is, I'll tell
Awesome,
you,
awesome.
it's no matter what sport it is, just having a band. A lot of the games we covered this year, all the schools had bands, and we were like, this is such a great element to high school football alone. But in any sport, having a band is just, it's like next level.
And then you get Brockton High School, whose band was legendary. I mean, they'd walk in 100, 200 in the good old days, 100, 200 strong, and it's like, wow, they're really good.
Yeah, it's a different atmosphere
Yeah.
and vibe for sure. Love it. I was very curious. A coach that you think has done a great job over the years of you covering high school sports that you maybe want to give a shout out to, or somebody who maybe doesn't always get that recognition that, he runs a great program or does a great job.
I mean, to me, the guy that I always go back to, and probably because I've gone back to probably Bill Loughnane, who's the basketball coach now at BC High. When I first started, he was at Southie. He was just getting going. And it's just a guy that I've always developed a great relationship with on and off the field. I mean, there are so many guys, and I hate to just single one guy out, but he's a guy that, I've always felt like he's that go-to guy, that he's always going to be honest with you. If he's not happy with you, he'll tell you.
Yeah. Hey, nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all.
um, Favorite article you've ever written, maybe covering a school or covering an athlete, like an article that just stands out to you that maybe just has significance or importance to you
The
nowadays.
one that I always was very proud of is years ago, they asked me to do the Latin English Thanksgiving Day rivalry, where and they gave me like 2 weeks to do it. You could really sink your teeth in, just talking to old time guys. And it was just like amazing because you hear these stories like, there used to be 35,000 people. I'm like, yeah, that's not true. And then you go back to the archives and look up, it's like, wow, he's right. And there was a guy there, Bill Orenberger, who was, I think, 95 at the time. I mean, his body was shot and everything, but we talked for 20 minutes. And, he gave me all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm going to have to fact check this guy. Wouldn't you know it? I mean, this guy was giving me these obscure scores and stuff from games in the 30s and 40s. I'm like, this guy's in his mid 90s. God bless him. He was right every single time. That was something I really enjoyed doing because I love the historical stuff of it and great stories that came out of it.
Yeah, and that must be really cool. I mean, that's obviously a big rivalry and a long time
Yeah.
rivalry. So being able to go back and look at that, I mean, that's a lot of research, but probably some cool research.
Going back to that real quick, there's
Yeah.
a story. There was the old time coach was Bill Stewart. His son told me this story that one year for Thanksgiving, his mother wanted one coach to wear, go dress nicely. So he bought a nice derby cap. They lost. He smashed the hat. He says, "I'll never wear that again." He left the hat on the field.
That's so funny. That's awesome. See, that's the cool stuff. That's just
Oh,
like
it was
those little
great. And
things.
unfortunately, with space nowadays, you don't get that opportunity. But that's something I really, really enjoyed sinking my teeth into.
That's awesome. That's great. Your favorite or most exciting game you've ever covered in your career?
I mean, to me, and I don't even think it was the greatest game I've ever covered, but I go back to '97 when St. John's Prep and Zavarian played on Thanksgiving. The buildup started in August because these two teams were clearly the two best teams. They were both nationally ranked. And it got ESPN in those days when they used to do scholastic sports. They had a truck came up there in '97. So I mean, it was a huge deal. USA Today sent a reporter up. I mean, the
Wow.
buildup was just phenomenal. And as it turned out, St. John's Prep and the talent on the field on that day. I mean, St. John's Prep, Brian St. Pierre, who went on to play at BC and then in the NFL, and now he's coaching at the Prep. He was the quarterback. He actually said, his touchdown run won the game for them. The talent level on the field that day, it was probably 10 to 12 kids who went on and played Division I college football.
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't realize all
Yeah.
that. That's awesome. What song, you go to all these places, you go to all these gyms, music's playing. I mean, music's changed what kids listen to now and maybe listen to 10, 15 years ago. But what song do you kind of still, when you hear it, you just kind of like bobbing your head a little bit, just kind of gets you a
I
little
think
pumped up?
when some of these schools play, jump around, I think that's one of those that, it just, because you watch grown-ups, getting up, bobbing their head, jumping around. It's like, this is what it's all about.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
I ask everyone that question because I always get a different answer. It's never the same one. It's just fun to always
Did
get.
anyone give you that answer?
No, that's the first I've ever heard
All
that
right.
song, so it's even
We like
better.
we like uniqueness.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Best high school football team you think in the state right now, in your opinion?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. It's Catholic Memorial. I
Yeah.
mean, they're talented. I mean, they have irritated some people with their decision to go to Division II because in my opinion, they should be Division I. I know they get worried about school size and this, but when you got that much talent, you should want to be in Division I. And they've
Right.
played 3 Division I teams. They beat them all by 30 points. I mean, there's no question they're the best team.
Yeah, agreed. I agree. Just from following everything along for sure. Um, and last question I'll ask you. What is in your winter sport? What is your, I mean, I think you might have kind of answered this, but what is the winter sport that you love covering the most and just have like the most knowledge on?
Oh, the basketball is no question. I mean, I grew up, I love basketball. It's the sport I know the most. And, as opposed to hockey, where I pretty much know hockey, but I'm America's biggest wuss when it comes to cold areas. And the cold rinks don't agree with me. So
Yeah.
basketball, nice warm environment, that works for me.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, listen, you survived the 2-minute drill, and
Yes.
we want to
And no
thank you
flag.
for coming on. No flags. I loved all your answers. I thought you killed it. I thought you killed it. Truthfully, you had the answers
Thank
ready to
you.
go. I loved it.
You made me look good.
But I want to thank you for seriously coming on here. As I said, I
Oh,
am a
my
huge
pleasure. I enjoyed this
fan.
immensely.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I've been for a long time, and be able just to pick your brain a little bit and hear some of your answers to questions that I've always been kind of curious about. It was really cool. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on
Oh,
here.
no, thank you.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So
All right.
happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy
And
Thanksgiving to you and your family.
yeah,
Yeah, you did a good job. Where are the little ones?
so they're upstairs right now. So we actually, just for our audience, know this is the first time I've ever cut a morning podcast. So we did this as 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday before Thanksgiving that we did this, and they're upstairs. My wife's actually taking care of them. I hear the pitter pattering a little bit, but yeah, for the most part, it was kept pretty quiet. I was worried that they might
You
come
got that
down here.
football discipline.
That's it. We trained here. Certain times, when that door's shut, you can't come in. That's it.
Well done, my man.
Thank you. Well, listen, from Beyond Podcast, I'm your host, Anthony Petrellis, Danny Ventura. Till next time.